MicroBrewr Podcast, Session 14. Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. We talk about everything craft beer related, and we really want to focus on people who are looking at starting up their own breweries or want to take their existing breweries to the next level. This is a weekly podcast interviewing brewers and brewery owners, going deep to get inside the industry and inside the heads of the people who work there. Each podcast is about 30 minutes in length, and we have show notes and other content at microbrewer.com. That's microbrewer.com. So be sure to look around on the website, check out the show notes, and leave a comment for this episode. I'd really appreciate that. So thank you so much for doing that. My name is Nathan Pierce, and I'm so happy to be your host for the podcast, taking over for Joe Schellerud. Thanks again, Joe, for letting me take on this podcast. When Joe stepped away after episode 12, I was really sad that this podcast was ending, so I asked him if I could take it over, and he agreed, so I'm thankful for that. I'll try to pick up right where he left off. In fact, that's his music you just heard in the intro. Before we get started, I want to tell you to stay tuned to the very end of the episode, where I have a question for you. Stay tuned all the way to the end. In this episode, I talk with Zachary Typinski from the upcoming Neighborhood Brewing Company in Ferndale, Michigan. Zachary has years of experience throughout the beer industry. He's worked in merchandising and retail, distribution, and sales. He's also a draft certified technician, a certified Cicerone, BJCP novice judge, and an award-winning homebrewer. And he's planning to, even in the process of opening his own brewery within the following year. So I wanted to talk with him and have him share his breadth of knowledge across a wide range of topics. Joe Schellerud was already planning to have Zachary on the podcast, so I gave him a call, and here's the interview. Okay, Zachary, I introduce you to the listeners. Please take just a couple of minutes and let us know more about you and the projects you're working on right now.
First of all, thanks for having me, Nathan. Really appreciate being on this show. I'm glad you're picking up for Joe where he left off. I think there's a ton of great information that's been shared here, and so really thankful to be a part of it. I started out actually straight out of college. I spoke with a local distributor. I was interviewing with some other companies at the time, and actually just talked to the distributor to kind of shake the butterflies at a career fair that they were having. And lo and behold, they called me about a week later and they offered me a merchandising position, which essentially means stocking the shelf, which I wasn't particularly happy about straight out of college, but took it because I had a very good passion for craft beer and knew some things about it. And so decided to go with it and turned it into far greater things. Went on to become a salesman. I did off-premise and on-premise sales, as well as some craft-specific sales. We had a craft department at the distributor I was working at, where I was able to get certified in a variety of different areas and really pursue my passion and take it kind of to that next full level. About a year ago, just got hired at a brewery out of Colorado called Oscar Blues Brewery, which I'm very happy managing the sales and distribution for the state of Michigan right now. So at this point, I've been building my career up to owning and operating our own brewery, which we are now very happy to announce that we are going forward with. And my partners and I are in the process of securing a building. So here we are talking about where we're at and what we're doing and what's next. So really excited.
Congratulations on these upcoming steps on the brewery. I definitely want to talk to you about that in a little bit. But you have so much extensive experience in pretty much seems like every sector of the beer industry. Let's see what we can learn from you about that.
Okay, well, I mean, basically the way that it's run is in three different tiers. You know, you have the supply side of it, which is the brewery, which I work at now. You have the distribution and wholesale side, which is your classic, you know, Budweiser, Miller, or, you know, Coors distributor. And then you have the retail sector. And so I've literally been able to work within those three sectors and kind of learn how the beer passes through the channel, all the way from the brew house at the brewery, all the way back to the shelf.
I saw in an email to Joe when you guys were scheduling an interview that you have experience in merchandising and retail and distribution. So I'm wondering, as far as merchandising and retail, what are some things that we need to know that somebody who is planning to start a brewery and hasn't really gotten into it yet might be overlooking?
I think that it's incredibly important for breweries to realize, and startup breweries, existing breweries, the impact that they have to make on consumers at that point of purchase. A lot of breweries underestimate the impact that they need to make with things like design of their packaging, alcohol content, description of the beer, maybe the location of the brewery and tap room, you know, things like that consumers are really interested in. I think that most breweries underestimate the value they have in that, you know, 4x4, you know, 6x4 space they have on a 6-pack holder. So I guess need to really realize how impactful they need to be and how the different factors that they can have on getting that consumer to actually pick up that package off the shelf.
Obviously, the beer maker isn't going to be there encouraging the customer to buy their beer at the point of sale. How can they work with the retailers to push their product, to sort of encourage the retailer to help the customer understand that their product is the one that they want to buy?
Well, first and foremost, you've got to put a quality product in the bottle. If you don't have a quality product, the retailer's not going to want to sell it. The consumer's not going to want to buy it. But beyond that, there are a number of factors that you can take into account that will help you sell your package at retail. You need to look at where your product is located in the cooler in comparison, you know, with other products in your kind of I guess, demographic, so to speak. You know what I mean? If you want to take into example, you know, if you're a Michigan brewery, you want to be next to the beers that are, you know, being brewed in Michigan. So shelf placement is very important. Pricing is obviously very important. The retailer also needs to have value in that pricing too. And so the price to the retail needs to be profitable enough for the retailer to carry the product and pass it on to the consumer that has a value enough to then purchase it. So pricing is also a very big factor. Whether or not you have any information such as shelf talkers, rate beer cards, you know, any point of sale that can, you know, attract a consumer's eye to your product is incredibly important. If you can get some beer on the floor, if you can get a display that shows and highlights a new beer that you have available, any increase for the consumer to catch their eye, to have an impulse reaction and grab that 6-pack out of the, you know, out of that 3-case stack that you have on the floor. I mean, those are all very, very critical factors.
At my favorite place to buy craft beer just a couple blocks from my home, I noticed those rate beer cards where I can, has like a QR code. I could scan it with my phone and it'll take me to the website to give me like the rating of the beer and some other tasting notes and whatnot. Is that kind of stuff pretty important? Like how many customers are just sort of browsing, looking for a new beer?
That's incredibly important, you know, and consumers, just like us, are very educated nowadays. The beer advocates and the rate beers of the world have done an incredible job to kind of elevate the game and actually provide a forum for consumers to voice their opinion, so to speak. And so consumers are relying on that more and more to feel comfortable to pay, you know, $10, $9.99 or $10.99 for a 6-pack of craft beer they want to know that it's good. And so I think that's incredibly important. If you can snap the QR tag, that's just the brewery making it that much easier for you to go on and rate its product, because it feels confident enough that its reviews and the quality that's in the can or the bottle is going to stand up.
What about for those customers who already are? They know what they're going to get. They just walk in, kind of open up the door and grab the same beer that they always get. Is there anything to sort of attract those customers to try out my beer?
Well, I think the key is getting liquid to lips, and that's kind of a I don't know, cliche phrase, or and I'm coining it here on this podcast now, I guess. But we've been saying it for years. I mean, that's your strongest marketing factor, is liquid within your glass. And so, if you can get a tasting at that an account, if you can get a hand sale or a promotion where you can come in and actually tell people about your brewery, give them a small sample of the beer that you guys produce, those things are incredibly, incredibly valuable. So, you can steal consumers, or, steal is a kind of an aggressive term, but, you want people to try your product, and the only way to do it is to put it right in front of their face. And so getting liquid to lips, getting tastings out there is incredibly important.
I was up in Berkeley this weekend, and I saw on the chalkboard like an upcoming event was talking about a bottle takeover. I've heard of a tap takeover, where a certain brewery will come in and just throw in a whole bunch of their own beers on every tap in the place. What's a bottle takeover? Is that something that somebody can do at a retail outlet?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool. That's pretty innovative. I haven't heard of a whole lot of places doing things like that. We've done some, I guess, what we call candemonium can takeovers, because we like to promote, that our brewery cans its beer, and we like to speak to why we put it in a can. And so that's kind of a way for that brewery to get its package in someone else's hands, and that's just another innovative way of doing it. Not everyone wants to take 6 to 8, even 10 taps, and they put on a couple half barrels and the rest sixtels, and that's a lot of beer for them to sell. But if you take a couple cases of their bottles, that's an avenue for maybe a smaller brewery to come on and prove itself, and hopefully get its beer on tap afterwards.
So what is a bottle takeover or a can takeover? Does that mean all the other beers on the shelf are getting taken off for a day, and one brand is getting put up there just for the happy hour or something like that?
It kind of depends on the retailer, whatever he kind of wants to do. The ones that I've done in the past have been, the only package that you can get on the patio that day is, our 3 styles of cans, or they could do the only, craft bottles that we're featuring today are these bottles. Rarely does a bar or a restaurant or even a brew pub take off its entire menu and say you only have to get these few products. But more often than not, it's just a feature in order to get consumers attracted to that more than the rest of their list.
It could just take lots of different shapes, it sounds like.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of these operators, so to speak, are trying to get very innovative with different styles of events and do fun things for the consumer to be attracted. And, that's just one of them. They can tailor it really to any way they'd like.
So we've talked a lot about retail. Let's talk a little bit about packaging, because when I was putting together my business plan for a brewery that I'm planning, there were some things that I didn't realize I would need. Like, if I want to put beer into a 6-pack, I obviously need a bottle and a label and a bottle cap, as well as the carton that holds 6 bottles, for example. Mm-hmm. And then there's another package that my 6-pack goes into on its way from my brewery to the store. Are there anything else that maybe somebody's overlooking that they haven't thought of to put in the budget?
First of all, I guess I should mention that the brewery that we're starting is called Neighborhood Brewing Company. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning of the interview, but at Neighborhood Brewing Company, we're not planning to package our brewery initially. And we factored in the costs associated with packaging and becoming a packaging brewery. And we just kind of decided that it wasn't in our initial business plan or business model because of a lot of the factors that go into it. I mean, it's a manufacturing facility beyond just, a pub or, a tap room. For a variety of different factors, we intend on not packaging any of our products specifically for the costs associated with it that you talked about.
A lot of startup breweries, I think, are planning to only put their beer into kegs and forget about bottles or cans or anything else, at least in the short term. So that if somebody wants to put their beer into bottles, do they need to deal with all that packaging, or can they maybe just plan on 22-ounce bottles, labels, and bottle caps?
I mean, they can plan on those, but I mean, more often than not, what they don't factor in is the labor associated with operating, a machine like a bottling line. You're talking, 2 to 5 people, depending on the size of the system. I mean, it needs to be purged with oxygen. It needs to be filled with beer. It needs to be capped. It needs to be wiped off or cleaned off, sprayed off. It needs to be, bottled. It needs to be put back into the 12-pack or 24-pack holder, taped shut, and then the case that carries it needs to be, labeled and then put on a pallet. I mean, I think a lot of people don't factor in how many factors there are in order to getting their product, onto the consumer. And that doesn't even begin to touch on the fact that when you go through a distribution network, you're passing a portion of your profits on to that distributor. And that distributor will mark that up 30% in order to sell it. And so if you're not selling those products in-house, if you're not selling them through your tap lines or through growlers, you're passing profits on to the distributor who, is selling your product.
So there's sort of a discussion or debate as far as for a small craft brewery, what kind of distributor they should go with. Do you have any advice for having worked in that part of the industry?
Well, with my experience, I will say that, at Neighborhood, we intend on not distributing within the first 3 to 5 years for some of the challenges that I've learned throughout the industry. I mean, I would say that there's room for reform in the way that the wholesaler and distribution kind of networks are set up here in the United States, and state to state, they vary quite a bit. But here in Michigan, it's very tough for a small brewery to make an impact on a Budweiser or a Miller or Coors wholesaler, because they're just simply not going to sell enough beer. I think more and more breweries need to take a good hard look on at what their intentions are, how many distribution points they're looking for, and how that factors into which wholesaler they're trying to go through.
Do you have any suggestions for questions to ask a distributor when a brewery is trying to decide which one to go with?
First and foremost, I mean, distribution points. How many points of distribution can I expect to obtain? What's your account base? If you have, say, 100 accounts that are considered craft beer accounts, which is a very small amount, I'm just using it for an example, how many of those accounts do you expect for my beers to get into? And at those 100 accounts, how many different SKUs do you expect to get in there? And so, ultimately, how much beer do you expect to sell for a given year, and how much marketing dollars or how many marketing dollars do you intend on spending on that product? So, a lot of craft breweries get a little overzealous. They go into a distributor and they say, oh, we want to sell beer, and this and that, and they don't negotiate terms for selling that beer. You have to have a clear, concise picture and accurate representation of exactly how much beer you intend to sell in that market. until you can give that distributor a clear picture of your goals.
Zachary, you're a draft certified technician. What is that?
Basically, I went to, a 3-day course that took me through from start to finish, how to design draft systems, how to support draft systems, clean draft systems, what are expected, and kind of what the gold standard is for maintaining, and operating draft systems. So basically extensive draft knowledge, so to speak.
So for a lot of breweries who are planning on just selling beer on their location on tap, what do they need to know about keeping clean lines or long line versus short line or different things like that?
Well, first and foremost, you want the shortest possible draw that you can possibly have. The longer the line, the longer the cleaning solution, the longer the interval you have to clean it, the more that could go wrong, the more kinks that are in the system, the more you have to run it through different areas of the building and whatnot. And so I would think first and foremost that the goal of most microbreweries is to have what's called a direct draw system. And a direct draw system, in theory, directly draws from either the conditioning tanks or the kegs into the taps. And so, that would technically mean that the cooler would be, share a wall with the back of the taps, or be drawn from, the lower level, less than 15 feet per se, and pushed, with CO2 directly to those taps. And so the longer of a draw you have, the more beer you have inside, the more waste that you get. If you have a 100-foot draw, I was working with some accounts that had 200 feet draws in some areas, and there's almost a 6 barrel of beer in, some of those lines. That's an incredible amount of waste for not only a retailer, but also for a brewery. So, for freshness, for cleaning reasons, for maintenance, you want to be direct draw or short draw, and kind of limit the long draw aspect as much as you possibly can.
200 feet of draft lines. You said 1/6 of a barrel. That's like a third of a keg in there.
Yeah, and don't quote me on that, but it was very, very close. And we tried to calculate the amount of waste, because this particular account I was working with, they didn't have any 6 barrels, and we were asking them why they didn't pour 6 barrels. Well, then they took us through the length of their draw and their cooler in like the basement corner, and we understood why. It just doesn't make sense for them, not only cost per ounce wise, but drawing it through that long line. That's an incredible amount of beer.
So whether it's kegs, ideally kegs you could probably have under the tap. If you're serving from serving tanks or bright tanks, keep them less than 15 feet from the tap. Exactly.
And you can do pretty well with pushing the beer even beyond the 15 feet a little bit, but basically you want the shortest possible tubing that you can get from the keg to the line. And by shortest possible, 4 feet is kind of the minimum. If you can get 4 to 6 feet, that's incredible, because then you have real incredible efficiency. But most breweries have probably between 15 to 30 foot draw, I would say.
Shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, huh?
You got it, man.
And you're a BJCP novice judge. What does BJCP stand for?
Beer Judge Certification Program. So it's basically the gold standard, you could call it, for judging beer. And it was a way for me to get in touch with my community and judge some homebrew competitions. And I also have some friends that are BJCP judges. And so basically you have to pass a test that says how to identify off flavors, what caused them, food pairings. You've got style preferences and the distinction between different styles. So BJCP is the standard for styles for America.
In the pre-interview call, you were telling me what happened this weekend.
The National Homebrew Competition was actually this weekend, and the National Homebrewers Conference was there to support it. So the National Homebrew final round of competition judging happened at the National Homebrewers Conference in Grand Rapids, Michigan this past week.
Did you judge?
I did not judge, actually. I was in attendance I saw, I think, 10 different seminars. There was a variety of different people from Mitch Steele to John Palmer. There was some legal help, just all kinds of different people that were speaking. And so I was able to actually fully enjoy it as a consumer this time and not have to deal with judging or stewarding, which was nice. But, my brethren probably wouldn't be too happy about it.
They're novice judges.
Yeah, and I mean, the novice judge is just a very elementary. There's nationally ranked judges that are far beyond. I basically have to gain experience by judging in more competitions, and so I'm kind of in the initial stages of what you would call a BJCP judge. I'm not a Grand Master judge by any means, but have spent a lot of time on it. I'm also a level 2 certified Cicerone, which helped quite a bit with the BJCP exam. But yeah, I'm no Grand Meister.
Nice. I'm studying for the level 1 Cicerone, the certified beer server right now.
Cool, man. Yeah, you would definitely get a lot of value out of that. I think that pretty much every restaurant server, bartender, bar manager should 100% be certified beer servers.
I think it's going to be taking more and more prominence. It seems it's only been around since 2008, I think. I saw on a YouTube video when they interviewed the founder, but it seems like it's taken off pretty quickly, and people are starting to recognize the importance of getting a quality product from somebody who knows about the product and how to serve it and how to store it and pour it and whatnot. You're
100% accurate. I see it growing immensely within the next few years, just like it has in the last few, and I think it's great for the industry. I mean, the BJCP is kind of the beer side of the industry, whereas the certified Cicerone side of it is more, I guess, towards the service style industry portion of it. So, you're more bar side, your craft beer bars, servers and whatnot. So I think it's very good for those two, kind of entities to be pushing the industry in the direction it is, because education is really going to be key for where craft beer ends up.
Well, let's start talking about Neighborhood Brewing Company?
Neighborhood Brewing Company.
Neighborhood Brewing Company.
Yes, sir. So we started off about 5 years ago. That's when I initially developed the plans to kind of go in this direction 5 or 6 years ago, what have you. When I was initially starting off at the distributorship, I became so passionate about it so quickly that I realized that I could really make this a long-term career choice. And so if I was going to do that, I was going to start developing my business plan. And so I worked on the business plan for 5-6 years. It's still a continuing process, as always, as every business should do. But yeah, we're at the point now where we're in the closing stages of purchasing a property here in Ferndale, Michigan, and we're ready to go. We're gonna gut that thing out and take it down to concrete, pour some trench drains in there, and remodel it. And here we go. Maybe 18 months from now, I think we'll be pouring beer.
Well, you have a wide range of experience throughout the industry, but I imagine you've learned something through this process. What's the biggest thing that you've learned? Has there been something new that you put into your business plan that you didn't think about in the beginning?
Yeah, there's been a lot of new things. I had it in my head I was going to be, a nano brewery, and I was going to do a 1 barrel system and build up from there and expand. And, then I realized the vast amount of time that I was going to spend laboring over a brewing system and never being able to catch up with the demand for my product. And so a variety of things have changed since day one, but mainly it's, our brewing capacity and our intention on, what we're going to do from the start, as opposed to kind of growing into it. Because I think people rush into it far quicker than they should. And, taking some time and really seeing what's practical and what's going to make sense and be profitable, are huge factors.
Are you saying you scaled up from your original plan?
I did, yep. We're actually going to do a 7-barrel brew house, so it will allow us to do some 14-barrel batches, if we need to, and we could even do, 28-barrel batches if we wanted to brew all day and all night. But we're going to start with just 7-barrel batches. We have all used, repurposed equipment. I'm very big on doing the Frankenbrew kind of style system, very much in inspiration of Tom Hennessy from the Colorado Boy Brewery. Very fortunate to be partnered up with an engineer that had been compiling equipment for a used, a 7-barrel dairy equipment system for years before I had met him. And when I had met him, we kind of had that serendipitous moment. It was like, holy crap, we want to do the same thing. And he had the components in his garage. And so, we've got a 7-barrel system. We've got 5 used, 300-gallon tanks that we'll do our fermentation in. We'll do all open style fermentation, so very different from the closed conical style fermentation that most breweries are doing nowadays. We're going to take a much more traditional approach, but we found with our experience and our testings and what suits our business model that open style fermentation is really the way to go for us.
It sounds like a monastery.
It is a little bit of a monastery, I don't know that we'll hold service there, but we very much, want to pay as much respect as we can to the beer that we're producing, on a day-to-day basis. And we're taking a lot of inspiration from the monks and the dedication and the time they have in perfecting their craft and making sure that it's quality, because we intend to do the same thing.
I'm kind of new to the beer world. Did I have that correct when you say open fermentation? It's like the pictures I've seen of the Trappist style ales. Just has like a gigantic vat with the top totally open to yeast to fall in. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. I think a lot of the Trappist monasteries have now went to more modern technologies with the conical style fermentation tanks, but they did take quite a bit of time to go in that direction. But yeah, open fermentation, we'll have lids on our vessels. Most monasteries just had sanitary, clean rooms, which we'll also have as well, but they had no lids on, their fermenters for the most part. They just had, straight open style fermentation, but allows us to get a whole nother flavor quality in our beer, the esters, the aromas that are produced in an environment where yeast is not stressed like it is in a conical pressurized environment, produces absolutely phenomenal results. And we believe 100% in the yeast collection properties. We can, harvest very, very fresh, good, viable yeast from the top of a fermentation, because it's an ale yeast, and most conical fermenters, they draw yeast from the bottom. And so we'll be actually drawing yeast from the top, where top style fermentation should be drawn from. So, we'll have a great number of advantages, but, we just love the flavor that open fermentation produces.
Well, that was the first kind of beer that I got into when I first found out about the wonderful world of beer. So I'm looking forward to someday tasting yours.
Oh, yeah. I'll send you some samples, man. We got some pilot brews.
Killer. Thanks.
For sure.
How are you defining success in your future brewery? What are your goals for your company?
The goals for our company is just to provide value for our local community. I mean, I brew beer because it makes people happy. And I know it sounds kind of silly and cliche to say, but I love beer myself, but more than anything, I love to share it with somebody else, and I love to talk about it, and I love the experiences that are associated with it and the adventures that you have while drinking it. And so I want people to be able to take our beer, to places that they get enjoyment, and that's the ultimate goal, is to provide our community value in quality in our product, and being able to take that and have the same experiences that you have with, craft beers wherever you go.
Community is definitely a widely appreciated theme in craft beer. It's something that's attracted me to it and has made me sort of a fan of not only craft beer as a product, but craft beer as sort of a concept and an ideal or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about. It's all about the community and the guy sitting next to you at the bar that you spark up a random conversation with, that, you can have a good time. You can have a good time with, and it's really about enriching your community, and, like I said earlier, providing value in the best way that you can. And to me, that's a locally sourced, sustainably raised product that makes the consumer feel good in an environment that is enriching for not only them, but for their family and for the community. I mean, that's by far and away what it's all about.
Totally. So I want to take a question from one of our listeners, Eric Simon, who asks, what beer do you want to brew but aren't going to because it's too risky or won't be popular enough?
I would say probably our Schwarzbier. I think the black beer style is an ugly redheaded stepchild to maybe the porter or the stout. I think that I love black ales and black lagers, particularly. I think they're one of my favorite styles, but I think that it's a miss as far as a consumer that's expecting a porter or a stout, and explaining to them why it's a little thinner bodied and a little less hoppy, and a little less in alcohol. I think they don't get it, and so I think Schwarzbier is probably the one we're going to err on the side of caution on.
Maybe the future has a place for it.
Absolutely. It'll be in the pub just so I can drink it, but it'll probably be our slowest mover.
Okay, listeners, if you have a question you would like to ask a guest on the MicroBrewr Podcast, let me know on Twitter at MicroBrewr. All right, it's time for happy hour. The next set of questions are a little lighter. We're going to get to know each other a little better and have some fun, get some industry insight. Are you ready, Zachary?
Ready.
Cans or bottles?
Oh, cans all the way.
What's your favorite memory since working in the craft beer industry?
Favorite memory since working in the craft beer industry? Well, last year I won a homebrew competition, and the grand prize was having a production batch of your beer brewed and distributed throughout the state. And so it was done by a brewery called Rochester Mills Beer Company, which is in Michigan, a little bit of Ohio. But being able to see how the process worked from my 5-gallon batch all the way up to their 50-barrel batch was absolutely incredible. And to be able to go on and buy that at retail and say, this is the beer that, I designed, that won this contest, that I got to brew and be there, stirring the mash tun and adding the hops and the gypsum and whatnot. That was an incredibly surreal experience for me, and a key motivator for, all right, this is time. This brewery is not just a pipe dream. It's your life's mission.
That's awesome. Did you actually buy some of your own beer?
I did. Yep. I bought quite a bit of it, actually. I did, I went to some bars and whatnot and did some kind of events surrounding, the beer for some of the local retailers and stuff that I had relationships with. But, I was able to throw a party for my friends and family to go and have like kind of a ceremonial tapping. And, I bought it at, I think, maybe 10 or 15 different places, but I think it was ultimately distributed to 60 or so locations throughout the state of Michigan. So to have it at 60 bars and to have my name on it and the story behind it, to promote homebrewing and to promote, our story was just really surreal. It was.
So what's the most challenging beer you've ever made?
Ironically enough, I have to say Pilsner. I mean, Pilsner, although the big breweries kind of get bashed for brewing, a crappy beer, so to speak, Pilsner is a very delicate style that you cannot hide any off flavors or any kind of flaws or defects in at all. And so in order to get that very delicate and clean flavor, you've got to be a very clean and delicate brewer with very calculated adjustments and attention to detail. And so it's a very, very difficult beer to brew and to brew consistently. So if there is one, hats off to the big brewers. It's for brewing that and for brewing it consistently. It really is. It's a tough beer.
If you're going to make a 5-gallon batch at home this weekend, what beer would you make?
I am actually making a 5-gallon batch of beer this weekend, and what I'm going to brew is my Patters beer, to be quite honest. I love, we talked about it a little bit earlier, kind of the Patters beer style and the Monk's table beer, so to speak, which is, a 4.5 to 5%, blonde, Belgian style blonde, which is ultimately a good drinking beer. And so I brewed about 11 gallons of it a couple months ago, and I'm on my last little bit, and friends of mine loved it, and I love it, and so I'm gonna brew it again this weekend.
Tell me one beer style that you think will be gaining more attention.
Well, we kind of just touched on it a little bit, but I think it's 100% the light beer category. If we're to be successful as a craft beer industry in the future, we're going to steal or take consumers from American light lager, and the only way to do that is producing beers that are palatable enough for them to recognize. And so I think that's a style that's maybe a little bit underrepresented and a little undervalued as far as the craft brewing community goes, but that's going to be the key to our long-term success and to getting it to 20% market share.
Yeah, there was an article that went around on the internet recently. We're going to need a bigger boat, talking about how the Brewers Association changed their mission statement to get 20% of market share, that craft beer would get 20% of market share by 2020. So a lot of the talk and the goal around that is about converting people from, American lager light beer over to craft beer. And I actually wrote a blog, if I could be so audacious, I said that we might be seeing a lager renaissance, a renaissance of lagers. The audience can read that, or if you want to check it out, Zachary, you can read it at nathanpierce.me. I said there's been a lot of good tasting lagers. Like, really, lagers steered me clear of beer for years. And when I finally got into beer, it definitely was not lagers. But lately I've been tasting some beers that are pretty decent and sometimes good. Pilsners, Kolsch's, or different kinds of lagers. And if we're going to be converting people from sort of flavorless, watered down sort of American lager, it's going to be the light beers that's going to be the introduction into the craft beer world for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I went through this, I kind of got into craft beer at like the IPA level, which some people do, some people don't, but, went all the way through this whole spectrum, into Imperial Stout and Bourbon Imperial Stout and all that stuff. And then, kind of what I really crave now is that just really good, well-made, easy drinking beer. And it's kind of made this, weave back to, that Pilsner and Blonde category, which gets a bad rap, but to be quite honest, it's there's good beer to be had in there too.
What's up with session ales? Is that just a light beer in disguise?
That's just a light beer in disguise, 100%. I think a lot of people are getting tired of the term session beer and, this kind of session IPA or, whatever you want to call it. And it's a light beer in disguise, 100%.
Can you suggest a book for our audience that will help them succeed in opening a brewery or being a business owner?
Opening a brewery or being a business owner, I would say the business side of it for me was reading Brewing Up a Business by Sam Calagione. I was absolutely inspired by his story, his writing style, the way that he kind of got into the industry. And so for the business side of it, that's kind of my go-to. As far as, the technical side of it, I would say the Brewery Operations Manual by Tom Hennessy from Colorado Boy Brewery, which is kind of the Frankenbrew style, which is where we've modeled really where we're going with our brewery off of.
Give us one last piece of advice for someone who just brewed the first batch at their new brewery, and then we'll close up the brew house for the night.
Make sure you can brew the same beer again next time. Consistency, quality, making sure you can give that to consumer in the last way that you did the last time they had a pint. That's what it's all about.
Well, Zachary, I've had a great time chatting with you. Thanks for the help and insights into starting and operating a successful brewery. So tell us how we can stay in touch, and then we'll set this episode aside to ferment.
Great. Well, thanks again for having me. You can find our information at neighborhoodbrewco.com. You can find us on Facebook at Neighborhood Brew Co. We also have a blog at Neighborhood Brew Co. We're on Twitter and Instagram. So you can email me at Zach, Z-A-C-H, at neighborhoodbrewco.com if you'd like to get in touch with me personally, or through you, I suppose, huh?
Definitely. We'll have all the contact info on the show notes for this episode.
Okay, Nathan, thanks so much again for having me, man. It was great to talk to you.
I want to thank Zachary Typinski again. I really appreciate you for taking the time out of your busy day to be on MicroBrewr Podcast. And you, listeners, thanks for being here as well. Please check out Neighborhood Brewing Co. and let them know that you appreciated Zachary sharing his valuable information and advice on starting a brewery. Go to the show notes for this episode at microbrewer.com/session14. That's where you can find links to get in touch with Zachary and also check out the other resources that we mentioned in this episode. And as I said in the beginning of the episode, I have a question for you. If you could ask just one question to every brewer or brewery owner, what would you ask? Please go to the show notes page for this episode now, microbrewer.com/session14, and in the comment section at the bottom, tell me what you would ask. And I just want to thank you again for listening, and until next time, support your local brewery, and we will see you next week.